Welcome, everybody, to this week's Tech Threads interview. This week, I'm talking with Gary Quan, who is a senior technical project manager at Activision. And I'm super excited to have him on. I think his background in gaming, also as a technical project manager, with his experience, he'll talk a little bit about it. But I think he has some great insights into how to work with cross-functional teams because that's, what he's done for his entire career. But before we get started, Gary, I'm just going to pass it off to you real quick to kind of explain who you are, maybe some of the projects you've been working on, and kind of what your career has been looking like. So take it away.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks for having me. So the way I got into technical project management is I started off in as an engineer, actually, right? So my background is with computer science, and I kind of done the typical path, like starting off as junior engineer and kind of evolving to a senior role and then team lead and so on. And one thing I kind of identified during my work as an engineer is the need to kind of help organize the team, right? And this is when we kind of get into more project management practices. And that's when I transition over to be a dedicated project manager, right?
Mhm.
I've been doing it for the past, wow, like over 15 years at this point, with like 13 of that with Activision Publishing, right?
Mhm.
Uh, Video games slightly different. We'll get into that later. But generally, my role within Activision is to work with our data department. There's about 45 of us. Uh, Data engineering team, our big responsibility is really to be able to kind of gather the different types of telemetry that we collect from our games, and then to be able to help our data scientists or data analysts to then provide the reporting that the business needs in order to um, collect our KPIs and to make sure that we're on track.
Yeah, I think that's super awesome that you kind of come from an engineering background. Me personally, I've also come from an engineering background. I studied software engineering for like the first 2.5 years of my college career. So I know that us engineers are like kind of wired differently. And a lot of people say that. And that's one of the biggest problems for someone who's like non-technical, I guess you would say, jumping into like a more technical role. But like for you coming from that background and now working with people who are like wired that way, how do you like what advice do you have for people who come from a non-technical background on how to work better with technical people?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest thing is you just kind of have to get over like a lot of the jargon that's
Mhm.
involved in the technical field. And honestly, that kind of comes with time, right? And it depends on the team, like it depends on the engineers that you're interacting with, right? I'm very fortunate in that I've always worked with engineers who, once you have shown that you're interested in what it
Mhm.
is, the work that they're involved with, right? They're very happy to kind of show anybody with a non-technical background, like, their field of expertise. I think it's a matter of just kind of asking the question a lot of the times, right? If you're not willing
Right.
to potentially kind of like show weakness, that if you're not willing to ask the question, you're never really going to get the answers that you're looking for.
Right. Do you have any examples of like kind of what you've done to kind of go above and beyond and kind of like out of your way to like show them, like you said, like you're like interested in them, you're really trying to learn, but you just need some help? Do you have any examples of like things you've done or you've seen people do?
Yeah, I have like a very recent example that
Mhm.
I'm actually currently working on, right? We're evaluating different types of technology that will kind of provide us with a more real-time, online analytics platform, right? Um, so it is a new area, like for me personally, right?
Mhm.
A lot of our engineers are the experts in that area just because of all the different proof of concept that they might have done already and the tech evaluation that they have gone through. So for
Mhm.
me to go, okay, well, how do we set up our environment, right? What type of data can we ingest? What type of latency can we expect? How many queries per seconds can we expect to handle and still be able to provide a timely response to our customers? So even just kind of starting with that very high level kind of introductory type questions, I think kind of goes a long ways to kind of show as a project manager that you are very much not just interested in the work as an item that the PM needs to track, right? But also as what's actually involved with the work. Like, what are some of the
Mhm.
difficulties that we could expect engineering wise, right? Because that's what a
Right.
lot of the technical work involves.
Right. Starting with that high level, I think even like for you, probably as a PM, I mean, you have a technical background, but for a lot of people, that high level view is kind of like what they need to get oriented in these projects to like really know how they can help the rest of the team kind of chug along on that process. Another problem I've seen a lot of people have, and I actually had during my internship as an IT project manager, but like oftentimes on these projects, you have engineers or people who are working on multiple different projects, or maybe even you're guiding multiple different projects at the same time. How do you kind of balance and make sure that the people are doing, what they need to do for your project while they're also balancing other projects? How do you kind of manage that, that juggle of time?
Yeah, project prioritization is
Mhm,
it's challenging, let's put it that way. And I don't have like, I don't have like a silver bullet or anything to provide, right? But I think one of the main thing is as an organization. So just kind of like very much beyond just like my projects, right?
mhm,
If you do have team members that are responsible for multiple projects like across the org, like I think at the organization level, it must be made like fairly clear what each of the project priorities are, right? So
mhm.
that just could kind of help guide each of the PM and basically, just the project team in general, I would say, just kind of in beyond the project manager to go, well, how do I prioritize my work, right? So as a project manager, if at the organization level, let's say my project is like, fifth from the top, right? Um, and my engineer is not able to kind of spend a majority of their time on my work, right? Um, I think there has to be some sort of level of understanding, right? And you could
Mhm,
kind of call that out as part of your risk management and risk
mhm.
mitigation plan as well, right? So that's how, as a PM, you could kind of deal with maybe if you're not working on necessarily like the highest priority projects, like within your organization.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that I feel like a lot of people, especially younger project managers, they have is like trying to find where their project fits into these, organizational goals, like you said. Cause like, for example, in my internship, they had multiple different project managers doing multiple different projects, but oftentimes there's like one or two people that kind of bounce between all of the projects. I'm sure you, as like you've gone higher up in project management, like you are part of that person who kind of has your hand in everything, kind of like to guide everything. So it's really interesting to hear kind of your perspective on how to like balance that. And then I also wanted to ask you, like, how do you or what do you think is something project managers can do to like, because I mean, for me, for example, I know sometimes when you have people on your team, sometimes they're more bought into the project more than others. Like some people will just give like their 10%, like, oh, I did it. It's like not the best, but like, here you go. It fits the requirements, like go on. How do you get or like build that team culture to where everyone's giving 100% when they have, those parts of those projects?
Yeah, I think the objective and the value proposition of the projects has to be crystal clear, right? Or as
Mm,
clear as we could make it, right? As
right.
PM, right? Um, that sounds like it sounds very straightforward. It sounds like, yeah, of course you would do that. But the details is actually fairly difficult to work out sometimes. And you do have to kind of work with your stakeholder to really understand what are the value the business is trying to get from the delivery of a particular project, right? And then
Right.
just make that clear to the team that's working on it, right?
Right. Do you see any benefit? Because I know some people, it's kind of like one of those opinion things. Like some people see a value in keeping everyone in the loop on like the higher level, organization's goal and strategy. Do you find value in keeping engineers, in touch with those? Or like, what's your opinion around that? Because I know it's kind of something that some people like, some people say like, hey, don't. It's like, what are your thoughts on that?
Like absolutely. I think there is. no real drawback to having that transparency, right? Now, what an individual do with that information, I think it's then up to the individual. Because
Mm.
um, just because of history, I've worked with a lot of different engineers. Some engineers' preference is to be very heads down, right? Like they want to just be focused on the work that they're asked to do and deliver excellent quality for that work. They don't necessarily want to spend too much of their kind of like their mental bandwidth on larger goal, right? I think that's
Right.
okay. But like even for those individual, I don't think there are any kind of drawback to having that transparency, right? Like
Mhm.
it, especially if it's something as straightforward as, well, what are the priorities of all the different feature, let's say, that we're trying to deliver, right? Because that will then allow each of the teams to make the necessary trade-off. Like you may need to pause work in a certain area in order to get more engineering capacity in another area that's higher priority.
Right. And I totally agree with that with like keeping them involved. I'm part of what I'm studying right now is like user research and like UX design. And I've read multiple books about like fast UX design, how to like do it the right way. And oftentimes they'll say something very similar of like having the engineers, even though they are some like to be like heads down, I just want to code, I just want to make these features, but incorporating them in the process not only gives them like better context to what they're actually making to like kind of pick things out, but they've even said like engineers are brilliant. Like they go through a lot. They know a lot of things. And so if you incorporate it, they might have some ideas that just blow your mind and like have a different perspective on things. So I think even with like higher level strategy for companies, engineers are, really brilliant people who know what they're talking about and know how to build things. So there's no like, why not include them and like have
Yeah,
them
I
give
mean,
vision?
absolutely, right? Like,
Mhm.
exactly. Engineering is very creative, like people, right?
Mhm.
So stakeholders may not be the best. I mean, they're the expert at kind of like defining the business problem, right?
Mhm.
But engineers are the people who potentially could come up with like very creative solution that a project manager, for example, can't really define well in a project plan. At least not
Right.
initially, right? Like we'll iterate on it and we'll come up with better solutions, but certainly get that input from your engineer as well. And to kind of get that valid input, you really
Mhm.
must define your goals like in a very clear manner so people know what they're solving for. Right?
Right. Yeah. Cause I even remember like in my software engineering days, oftentimes they give us like a list of requirements and you like, I can make an app that hits all these requirements perfectly. But then in the end of the day, you put it in front of a user and it like doesn't do what you need it to do. It does, but it doesn't. And so I think having that transparency, kind of like we talked about earlier, like transparency is key, especially like when you're trying to, get buy-in, get your team to like help you more. And even in this aspect as well, like that transparency really helps. For you, what is like the biggest problem that you think or you've seen newer project managers have when it comes to working with cross-functional teams? And like, what's your remedy for that problem?
Hmm. That's an excellent question. What I've kind of observed a lot of the time is that initially, and and all teams kind of go through this, right? Like basically you're forming, storming, kind of norming, performing stages of just kind of like regular kind of team evolution, right? And I think a lot of newer PMs, I think they worry a little bit too much about like the storming stage, right?
Mm.
They get a little bit too uh like for me, it's kind of like a normal process that all teams kind of need to go through, right? Like
Hmm.
some conflict with the team, not all conflicts with the team need for a PM to kind of step in and try to resolve, right? A lot
Right.
of it is just kind of like a normal stage of what team goes through, especially for new teams, right? Or if the team's got like reorganized in some ways, you may have to go through like a storming stage again before you could kind of, start performing again, right?
Right.
So I would recommend just kind of, if there are problems that the team could kind of solve on their own, give them the time and space to do that. right? And only just kind of try to step in and try to, mediate in some cases, uh, if necessary, right? And it may not be necessary.
Right. Because I feel like even for us, when we do project teams in our like senior high up classes, yeah, there's always those stages of storming. You got to like figure out where your role is, how you fit with everyone else. Some people kind of butt heads because they kind of like want to take lead, but like, you're a team together. So you just got to like figure it out. And especially because I play basketball as well. And at the beginning of every season, we have like a big storming session when all of us get to campus. We have some new recruits, or like new people joining the team. All of us have played at a high level and we all like can score and can do all this, but you got to like kind of butt heads and see kind of like where everyone fits inside of this team. And even for us, like this year, we're having a pretty good season, but it's because most of the players that are playing were here last year and the year before. And so we've already like bypassed this storming phase into like, yeah, the performing, like we just know where we all fit in and we're just like a machine running down the court. And so it's interesting to see how that kind of translates over to something more like this, in a team setting with engineers, sometimes, yeah, just let them go. And sometimes you need to kind of like help guide and facilitate and kind of be that figure to kind of lead those teams. Thinking back to like your time as an engineer, is there like a quality or something that your leaders had that you really appreciated that kind of helped you perform at a higher level?
Yes, for sure. And fortunately, like a lot of the manager that I have to deal with kind of have this quality as well. Um, I mentioned this earlier, and I'm gonna say it again. Like I think transparency is a very big thing, right? I like manager who could kind of give like valuable feedback, like even if the feedback might not necessarily be kind of like what you necessarily want to hear, right?
Mhm.
So, for example, if I am suffering in like a particular area, right? Self-awareness, it's a great quality to have, but you may like I may not be self-aware in our area, right? So if a manager could kind of help kind of guide me um, in those particular instances and kind of give me some actionable feedback, I really appreciate that. Like for me anyways, I take feedback very well. And it's the input that I kind of need in order to kind of drive my career forward.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people have like a hard time with those types of conversations, especially leaders. Like no one wants to kind of hit that like conflicting stage with anybody. Do you have, I mean, like for someone who out there who possibly could be struggling with that, what advice would you give them on how to like bring those conversations up and how to kind of deliver the like criticism, the feedback in a constructive way, but also have like, you're being transparent and you're really telling them what they need to hear?
Yeah, let me think about the feedback mechanism for a second. But I think
Yeah,
for the
definitely.
person that's soliciting feedback, I would just ask for it outright, right? Because I absolutely agree with you. It is difficult to kind of give feedback sometimes, right? Like and I could
Right.
kind of see that for myself, uh, because it may very well be a peer that you work with on a day-to-day basis and you don't want necessarily to kind of upset that relationship, right?
Right.
Yeah. So as far as kind of like giving feedback, I think a lot of it has to do, like for me, a lot of it is you do have to find the right timing, right?
Mm,
Uh, and some of it, especially if I'm giving peer feedback, for example, right? It would be good to kind of know that person well first, right?
mm.
Just so you could kind of have like a good open channel of communication and that person understanding that you're coming from a good place, right?
Right.
You're just trying to improve the process and just kind of provide better results, like better outcome that will
Right.
benefit everyone, right? It's not criticizing for the sake of, you know, yeah, it's not providing like corrective action just for
Mhm.
the sake of it. I mean, it's to just kind of seek an outcome that is hopefully valuable for everyone, right?
Yeah, I think even like what you're talking about, like building the relationship beforehand. I think for me, like the best criticism I've ever received comes from someone who's close to me, and I think the reason that they do like give me like better criticism for me to kind of like get better is because they know me. Yeah, they truly do care, and I think you kind of building that relationship so that they understand as well, like, hey, I'm not just coming at you, but I'm like, I want to help you. I want to see you progress and grow and be successful. And like, this is the next step. This is what you need. I also think a lot of it, like you kind of mentioned before with like taking criticism, I think people have to be prepared for that as well. I'm sure you have a lot of, experience, like people, I'm like you love criticism and love to take it, and because it like makes you stronger, makes you better. Some people kind of have a hard time with that. And so I think it's just kind of like a personal mindset that we have to have as well, like as a listener, to be like, okay, I'm going to take this in, absorb it, and then act on it and like fix it, and not take it kind of like on a personal level, like you're trying to attack me,
I
which I think is
no,
important.
I think that is a huge thing, right? Like, just don't take it at a personal level, right? I know it's easy to say, like mentally it might hit me differently, right? But yeah, like I try to not take things personally, and just kind of like learn from it, right? And even if you disagree with the feedback, right?
Yeah.
Try to think about why that feedback was given in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's really up into the to the individual what action they take, right?
Hmm.
And the action in some cases could be, thank you for the feedback, and just go. If you don't think it's valid in some ways, you could just go, thank you for the feedback, and then um, carry on, right?
Yeah. I think, yeah, having that growth mindset, and yeah, like maybe ask yourself why they said that. Maybe what did they see that you're not seeing, and kind of work from there. But Gary, I know we're kind of cutting it close on time. So I just wanted to thank you once again for this chat tonight. You have so much information. I'm sure we could sit here for like hours on end and talk about multiple different subjects across the whole PM, landscape. But we won't do that tonight, maybe another time. But thanks again so much for your input, and I really appreciate your time tonight.
All right. Thanks a lot, Max. Take care.